Would staff come to order and take their seats, please? Thank you very much. All right, welcome to the special call December 7th, 2022 meeting of the City of Tuscaloosa Planning and Zoning Commission. This time I'd introduce our staff: Ashley Kreitz, Executive Director, Urban Development; Zach Pons, Acting Director of Planning; Mike Garner, Associate City Engineer; Jimbo Woodson, Deputy City Attorney. There are 9 members of the Planning Commission, all of whom are appointed by the mayor for staggered terms with the exception of the City Council representative who is appointed by the City Council. I ask the commission members to introduce themselves and state their occupations, beginning with Mr. Pugh.
Eddie Pugh, retired Tuscaloosa firefighter.
Estella Hare, Finance.
Tim Harrison, General Contractor.
Bill Wright, business owner. There are sign-up sheets outside for public comment. If you do not sign up, you'll be given an opportunity to speak during the public portion of this agenda. The commission will take up items in order of the agenda. The commission will receive a presentation from staff regarding proposed zoning text changes for the articles identified for discussion. The commission will vote to recommend or not recommend these amendments. Note that the Planning and Zoning Commission is a recommending body for zoning text and zoning map changes. The City Council is the final authority. After the staff presentation, the floor will be open for public comment. Individuals wishing to express support or opposition will be given 3 minutes to speak. Only the Planning and Zoning Commission can grant a specified time extension for an individual. Public comment will be received, the floor closed to public comment, and the commission will open discussion among themselves, reserving the opportunity to vote to accept or reject any proposed changes for final consideration at the review meetings that will take place in 2023. These proceedings are video recorded and broadcast live. All public comments should be made at the podium into the microphone. Please state your name and address for the record. Jurisdiction regarding zoning text amendment, section 115276 of the Code of Alabama states, the legislative body of such municipality shall provide for the manner in which such regulations and restrictions and the boundaries of such district shall be determined, established, and enforced from time to time, amended, supplemented, or changed, and may adopt such ordinances as may be necessary to carry into effect and make effective the provisions of this article. Planning and Zoning Commission serves as a recommending body to the legislative body. While the zoning text amendments will be considered in pieces, they will not be enforced until the full zoning text is adopted and the zoning map changes implemented. In layman's terms, if there is a vote at any point to recommend changes, they will not be enforced on any property until the City Council adopts the zoning text and zoning map changes formally through many public hearings. At this time, I would ask, do any members of the commission have any conflicts of interest or possible conflicts for any topics on the agenda for discussion this evening? If so, please state for the record. With that, we will begin.
Well, good evening, Commission. I also want to point out that since we're talking about subdivision regulations this evening, when the time comes, you are the final authority on your own regulations. They do not have to go to the City Council. They do not have to go anywhere else. So these, I think I've been most excited to get to talk about these because, you know, I'm a sick soul and I love subregs. I always have, I always will. It's just where we are in life. So remember that y'all get to be that final authority on your own subdivision regulations. So with our meeting expectations, I know it's just us chickens in the room tonight, but let's remember, steering committee members, please note your role in the process. If you have public comment, Planning Commission members, you've been able to review that draft ahead of time. Please refrain from arguing with public commenters. Just listen, ask questions. If you need clarification, be respectful, and we will get through this expeditiously. For everybody, we are beginning at 5 p.m. and ending no later than 7. If we don't get finished, we will roll it into the next meeting using a 3-minute timer for public comments, and only the Planning Commission can grant that time extension. And staff is managing the meeting, or the flow of the meeting, for efficiency's sake. Remember, in this code rewrite and looking at the subregs, we want to maintain what works and what doesn't. And as you've been able to see in the initial draft, we're trying to maintain what works, tweak it to update what doesn't, being more user-friendly by implementing the comp plan's recommendations and looking to update our development standards and permitted uses within the zoning ordinance. So talking about subdivision regulations tonight, your bread and butter, what you get to deal with every month. What we hope to accomplish with the new subdivision regulations is about fivefold. We want a new format that is going to carry forward what works in our existing regulations, but add new sections, some clarifications, modify what needs to be modified, but use modern regulations for today's standards, outline things in a very clear way to help you as decision makers in reviewing applications for subdivision. We will identify the authority, procedures, and regulations for subdividing land in the city. We have that today. We're just modifying it some. We're going to carry forward regulations from our current code that are applicable to subdivisions by clarifying, ensuring that the development is in accordance with the comp plan, and provide provisions that govern subdivision procedures, enforcement, and applicability. It's all the things that you're allowed to do by state law today, just in a clean fashion. And remembering that our current regulations were adopted originally in September of 1980. So they're kind of old. Not that anybody older than 1980 is old, but from a regulatory perspective, this document here is a dinosaur. And I know we've all gotten to talk about why it's a dinosaur. It's a dinosaur because when it was created, the development that was happening in the city of Tuscaloosa was not what you get to see day in and day out at your meetings. We now are looking at resurveys of existing subdivisions, eliminating lot lines. These regulations focus only on undeveloped land that is untapped. There's no cap sewer out there. There's no provision of utilities. There's nothing. And we're going to put a brand new residential subdivision on it and call it a day. And y'all have been amazing at working with us as we take these regulations and turn them into what we need them to be for what our current regulations, for what people are bringing in front of us. That being said, let's take this opportunity to undo the ambiguity on condominium subdivisions and master plans. It didn't account for how large our planning jurisdiction would be and how many items on your agenda would be county subdivisions. That agreement that we made with the county in 2013 has been very beneficial to us, but also it has very much increased. And we're not proposing getting rid of that. Please don't think that that's what we're saying, but we could update our regulations so that if it meets our regulations and the county regulations, perhaps that's administrative. Perhaps that's something that you don't have to see on a month-to-month basis. And so making sure some of those conflicts can be handled. Of course, our current graphics in the regulations are scans of scans. We could probably do a little bit better with those. And our current articles, I think my favorite article generally is a page long, and it's the use of metric and English dimensions. Of course, that was important in 1980, and we'll maintain the standards in here, but taking it out of being an article itself. There's 9 total. The appendices are a mess. They're scans of scans. So what we're proposing to do is neck this down to 7 total articles that will be very straightforward. And as you got a chance to look at the table of contents, and we're going to walk through the table of contents because I thought that might be the easiest way to bring up some topics for discussion tonight. Because we got some good feedback. We passed it around to the neighborhood TNT president. We sent it to the chamber folks, home builders, engineers, folks at the county, EDA, and ACRE. They all got this. And we've gotten some, and the engineers and surveyors, of course, that come here every month. And we've gotten good feedback from some folks. What we want to make sure we're doing is recognizing appropriate review bodies, that we're not forcing folks to go through processes that they don't have to, consolidating our definitions, modernizing, rewriting as appropriate. We're summarizing our application types and procedures within tables and graphics. And then I know you've seen referenced a couple times this procedures manual. we don't need to put into the subregs how you do something. That's going to be a separate document that both the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations will use for how to do X, Y, or Z. And so we'll cover that at a later meeting, this procedures manual, because I know it's been mentioned a couple times as well in the zoning meetings and the zoning updates. We'll align the regulations with the goals and objectives of framework, and then create some general regulations for subdivision with additional planning jurisdiction or City of Tuscaloosa standards. And I think that's been, as I've been the staff member responsible for the Planning Commission since about 2014, I've seen the need for, okay, you're in the City of Tuscaloosa, X, Y, and Z is happening. It's completely different from this piece of property that's in the planning jurisdiction. So how do we best handle these two items? I think we just separate them out, and if someone is coming to us and says, hey, I've got this piece of property, cool, man, I need you to turn to article this, page that. All your rules are right here. That's all you need to do. And that's my goal for folks, make it easy to handle. So our articles, let's take a look first at Article 1, which would be the general provisions. You'll see it's your basic everyday stuff. You were able to see that in the draft that you were sent. Nothing out of the ordinary. We get into definitions and rules for measurement. Again, things that we have in the current regulations, tweaking where needed, moving forward. The administration, the summary table of how we review subdivisions, the decision-making bodies, who gets to approve what, and then a few separate things. So the definitions will take a new look. You'll have the term and then the definition applicable to the ordinance next to them, instead of just being one line. But I do want to make a couple things of note. If you are open to it, I'd like to start using the term preliminary or a pre-plat meeting instead of a pre-design meeting. I know y'all don't often come across the pre-design meetings, but the term pre-design has always been confusing, especially when you're just looking at the division of land. So we'd like to start calling them pre-plat review or pre-plat conferences. It won't change much of anything else, but when we get into this next one, I'm eating crow on it, because I know I beat the drum of we need to call them variances because that's what the regulation calls them. The subregs say they're variances from the subregs. I'd like to backtrack. I'd like to backtrack the last 5 years of that drum and go back to calling them waivers. The confusion that happens when someone has a multi-board process, they've got to go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment and get a variance to allow X, Y, or Z to happen. And then they've got to come to the Planning Commission. And in the Planning Commission meeting, they're asking for variances from half-street improvements. And they say, well, why can't I just do all of this at ZBA? And it's just not the same. So if we go back to calling them waivers, we align ourselves with what the county calls them, and all is well.
So what's
in the world.
ZBA going to have? Still
The
variances?
ZBA is still variances.
They'll still have variance, we'll have waivers.
Yes,
Okay.
you'll go back to having
Yeah.
waivers.
Yeah.
A waiver from Cap Sewer, a waiver from Half Street. And then let's talk a little bit about minor subdivisions. So when minor subdivisions came into being sometime in 2015, 2016, thanks to state legislative action, you as a planning commission, an older version of the planning commission, but you as the planning commission chose to adopt the ability for there to be minor subdivisions, which would be administrative. They would be things that the staff could handle. And we've been successfully handling, there's not very many that come across anymore. But it's usually not more than creating no more than 3 lots or reducing, and then outside of the city limits, creating no more than 6 or reducing. But the kicker is you have to have all of the utilities in place. You have to have access to sewer because our regulations say you have to have capped sewer installed. And so that's why these things don't happen very often. But the other one is there's a lot of property in the downtown area and in the university area or along the lake that we could do minor subdivisions with. But the previous planning commission chose to cut out some things where they did not want that property to go, to be able to just go through staff. And that may be something for y'all to think about, to wrestle with. Do you want to continue to have those exceptions that no matter where the property is located, they still have to come to you? Or do you want to just say, all right, listen, if it meets the criteria, it meets the criteria?
Ashley?
Yeah.
My only issue with that is, and I hate to put more work on this commission, but in 9 out of 10 county plats where they're subdividing their land to sell off or air land or whatever, it's pretty easy for us when we just rubber stamp it. They give us the variances, will now be waivers, the cap sewer and the runoff studies and such, but we do run into those occasionally, like we ran into the one south of town that we had the issue on Mike. I think you can remember it, where we had the issue with the street frontage. Where we had the issue with the street frontage. One of the lots didn't have public road frontage, and they wanted to subdivide it, and we denied it. So I mean, occasionally, I think our jurisdiction needs to take place over items like that. And if that's just my opinion. I'd like to load shed all the work we have up here, but I think sometimes it's important for us to review those.
And I agree with you completely. I don't want to take anything that would ordinarily come to you, those variances or the waivers from public street frontage, things like that. Those matter in the overarching view of what is happening in the community and how we implement our land use plans. With minor subdivisions, what I would be thinking about is you've got a couple lots on 7th Street that you've got a property line running through a house, and
Yeah, sure.
they want to just remove that property line. You got sewer in the road, you got sidewalks, you got everything you could ever need, but that subdivision has to come to the Planning and Zoning Commission because it's in the downtown Riverfront Overlay District. And we have this provision today that says if it's in the downtown, no matter what it is, it has to come in front of the Planning Commission. And there may be some ways to refine it, because I don't know that you'd want to just let it be a free-for-all. You wouldn't want every townhome development to just go through staff and be done.
Right.
But I think if you were able to refine it in a way where cleanup work, for lack of a better term, was able to be done administratively, but you're not losing out on that bigger picture, that may be something for us to examine for you.
So Ashley, I guess my question would be, because I sympathize and understand Mr. Harrison's position, and even my short time, 4 years now maybe, on the commission, we do see those that occasionally. My question really is whether you think that there are sufficient new clarifications in the subdivision regulations, which I thought this was masterful work by the staff and by our consultants, to clarify so many things. If you think that those are sufficient to catch those and send them to us in some way, so that not every line through a house has to come here, but something as significant as street frontage would. And right now, it's been that we had to have them all because there were too many loopholes, right? And so if we're confident that some of those have been addressed significantly, so that they don't run the risk of creating problems, significant problems, then the routine ones, could come through. I don't know exactly how to be certain that that is happening, but that's the ideal solution, right?
So that's the ideal solution, coupled with, as long as it is a regulation and a requirement within our regulations, if they are asking for a waiver, it has to come to you
Of any sort.
of any sort. And that's where you get today, and we'll talk about this a little bit here in a second with lot configuration. I pulled that specifically as just a quick and easy one, but it can boil all the way down to capped sewer even, where right now our regulations say that you have to install capped sewer in the right-of-way, period. It doesn't account for the fact that I'm dissolving a lot line between two lots in an existing subdivision that there will never be sewer in because we're 400 miles away.
400.
That is a long way. I like that Jimbo's here. But you know, you're so far away from any existing sewer and any existing or planned sewer lines. And Mr. Gardner is going to say engineering has no objections. Well, do we need to have that request come to
Well,
you?
and although I understand that we want to balance our authority and control, but it's also a matter of the imposition on the landowner.
I agree.
Because we do have landowners who sit here for 2 or 3 hours at a time just
Just
to
for a
have
simple
something
request.
basically rubber stamped, and that's a burden that some folks
And that's what
can't, and they pay their surveyor or their
Right.
designer or their or whoever.
our hope and our goal is to eliminate the burden on all parties. Honestly.
Win-win.
On the neighbors, on the
Right.
on you as the planning commission, on the folks who own the piece of land, and then on also city staff, because they get to handle these mega caseloads as well. I think one of the biggest things I think about is capped sewer. Because 99%, we can go back in the archives, you have granted a variance from capped sewer 99% of the time. And in the few instances that you have not granted that variance request, it was because you shouldn't have granted it because there was sewer right there. And if we could just accomplish that with either an easement or, you know, if they were digging up property. And so that's where I think, because our regulations today were from the 1980s and only thought of vacant, undeveloped land, not everyone is going to go in and tear up their infrastructure when they're doing a subdivision. And so is it economic and feasible and right, quite frankly, for us to require someone to dig up everything to put in a capped sewer line? Or do we get that easement from them at that time? Do we make the requirement an easement? Or do we allow the city engineer and planning director to kind of talk about it and say, you know what, we're good here and it's not required? That way they're never in front of you saying, I would like a waiver from capped sewer tonight. We've gotten that worked out on the front end because our regulations make sense in a practical and applicable perspective. So that's what I'm hoping for. It's like lot configuration. When lot configuration requests come in front of you, a lot of times it's to increase density, but a lot of times it's also because the topo is just kind of bad. You know, and we'll talk about it here in a second, but we've written in where lot configuration can be agreed upon by the planning director and the city engineer. And if for whatever reason they don't agree with the request, that waiver then comes to you and they can make their case to you, as opposed to always having to come up with that. So,
I guess when you bring up lot configuration, a lot of times, and one of our pet peeves here has been flag lots. If we have a subdivision submission that does not seek a waiver on lot configuration and is creating a flag lot just to have that public road access, I think that's somewhat subjective.
Mhm.
And I think we've set a precedent on that basically if that lot configuration and that public street frontage combination creates a burden for a future owner for accessibility, where they're now accessing across an existing brother-in-law or cousins or aunts or uncle's lot where they couldn't access because of this lot configuration, I think those still need to come before.
I agree.
And how you trigger those trigger words that create that, hey, we don't need to see it versus hey, we need to see this because we've set this precedent. I mean, I'm all for getting out of here early.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so-
and y'all have created such good, you have been so consistent in how you've operated that it makes it very easy to say, okay, if this, then that,
Right.
and we can write that in so that you do get the one that's just trying to touch the road for public street frontage, but they want to cram 3 flags behind each other and pretend that's normal.
Right.
You know, that's the kind of stuff where, no, man, you just need to build a public road,
Right.
and then you've got public street frontage, and it's actually going to be the best situation for the entire community down the road. So we want to make sure that we're accomplishing that for you.
Do you envision in this process, say someone comes in and we think staff can handle approving, is there, and let's say that doesn't need to come to us. And say you tell the developer or petitioner, I can't do that.
Mhm.
At a staff level,
Mhm.
would they have the ability to request or appeal that to us?
An issue, so that's the
Good question.
word that
I
I'm
mean-
looking for is blanked on me, but the fail-safe, whatever the word is, I'm so sorry. If someone disagrees with what staff has done, and if staff says, no, we're not gonna let you do that, they then come to the planning commission. You are their relief mechanism.
I'd worry about if we let, not this staff, of course, but if
Yeah.
you let certain staff over time get that power
Yes.
mentality,
We agree, and that's why it can't
that's
be
what
everything.
you gotta, that's what you gotta watch out for.
Without any fallback for the
Yeah,
they
property
gotta-
owner.
It can't be everything. It needs to be those things that you see and grant all the time, like capped
Right.
sewer.
Right.
I'm just going to keep
Okay.
picking on cap sewer tonight.
That's fine.
But it's got to be stuff like that. Will it ever be sidewalks? No.
No.
It will never be sidewalks. There's no way that it can be. It's too hot.
And I guess the
of an
trick is
issue.
how you write that,
Right.
that works.
Yep. So I would anticipate you no longer seeing things like capped sewer variances, lot configuration, waivers, I'm so sorry. And there may be a couple others where if we can write in if you're in the county adjacent to the lake and you'd like to do ribbon curb, we'd like you to do ribbon curb too. And should you necessarily have to ask for a waiver from your typical cross-section when we have a typical cross-section for the lake area that is ribbon curb? And mystical, magical, we make it happen without anybody having to request a waiver. That's my goal. So we've got development review processes, tables within the subdivision regulations, some streamlined summaries with arrows and checkboxes for all of us. Because this is our development review process outlined today. It's not even clear. So when we get into the subdivision standards and design, this is what I've mentioned a couple different times, where we will have general regulations that are applicable to all, and then additional planning jurisdiction standards and additional City of Tuscaloosa standards. So you know generally what's going on, and if you're in the PJ, this. If you're in the city, this. And that way, you're not having to bounce all over the subregs and find that sentence that's hidden somewhere that talks about, the topic that Mr. Gardner has brought up and you've never seen before. We also are tackling condominium subdivisions, and we are not done with that portion of the subregs in the draft. We've still got to kind of work through that because condominium subdivisions, master plans, all of that today is just, we are not flying by the seat of our pants, but we are flying on very ill-written regulations that don't provide a lot of guidance. And we have created that guidance for ourselves over the year. But if the entire planning staff and engineering staff gets hit by a bus, you got to rework the wheel. So we'd rather solidify the processes that we've created to handle these things that are so vaguely written for both condos and master plans. Because I know that's come up in the past, and we need to make sure in the future there's no question. So when it comes to street designs, here's a few things to talk about. The new subdivision regulations will have standards, and you'll get a chance, I believe, a preview at the December meeting of the Tuscaloosa Transportation Standards. And that's been something that the Office of the City Engineer has been working on with a consultant group. It's been following alongside with Framework, and the time has come for them to bring it to you. So a lot of the plans and profiles that you see within today's subdivision regulations for, you've got a 3-inch curb, there would never be a 3-inch curve, 9-inch curb and gutter, whatever those are, those won't be in the subreg anymore because they will be in the Tuscaloosa Transportation Standards. And so these two documents will reflect each other, and that way when one gets updated, we don't have to update both. But we want to talk about the effect that street classification will have on the subdivision layout, basically lessening and eliminating driveways on collectors and above. There is a whole new section on connectivity. I don't know if y'all were able to take a look at that yet. It's a fascinating concept that we're still massaging as staff. So basically, it's a new subsection that emphasizes neighborhood connectivity. And it creates a connectivity index. And so what happens is you identify your links and your nodes. So links are places where they connect in. Nodes are cross points, decision points. And you are supposed to get an index of not less than 1.6. So you take your total number of links, you divide them by your number of nodes or cul-de-sacs, and you're supposed to not get below a 1.6. We want to test that out with a few more subdivisions that we've seen lately, and just see how they would measure up, because even in this example, the connectivity index score is 1.7. So we're not sure if 1.6 may be a little high. We'd like to test that more. But what this also does is it allows the planning director to reduce that index if, let's say, on this development down here, that's not really a link because everything to the south is floodway. And it'll never get developed, but they've put a stub street in there anyway. Well, that's going to decrease their availability. So let's use common sense and practicality as well. We also, a few new things that we've added in there and things for discussion. Stub streets. I know that has typically been a point of contention, but where future connection gets planned, we propose writing into the subregs a requirement that a durable sign be installed in that cul-de-sac or in that stub out that says future street connection. The number of times we would all have to count on our hands and toes the number of times that people have come in front of us and said, I didn't know. I had no idea that there was going to be, possible street connection. We've seen people build driveways into public street or into stub streets. They just use it as their driveway. So by requiring them to install this sign, at least we're calling a little bit of attention to the fact that someone at some point in time may come in and stub in.
I'd take out the word wood.
No
put
wood,
metal.
just
Yeah,
metal.
let's say something's gonna
That's
have
20 years,
longevity
it's gonna
in it.
be right.
Yeah, that's fair. Good
Yeah.
point.
I mean,
Let's just do metal.
Yeah.
Easy enough fix. For
that-
public street
that's-
frontage, yeah, go ahead.
Who handles, who puts that up, the developer?
The developer would.
All right, is there gonna be a standardized sign,
Yeah.
like the stop sign, like it's gotta be a certain
Honestly-
dimension?
I think that'd be good.
I think so. I think what we can do is we'll just standardize that sign size, and we'll put in,
That's a good
that
idea.
it's got to be X, Y, and this size, this material on this kind of pole, because it needs to be a street, like a street type poll. We'll just put it all in there. Okay, that's an easy fix.
Maintained by some-
For public street frontage, something to think about and something for us to consider, and we as staff were talking about it a little bit earlier today. I know the city minimum for public street frontage is 20 feet. The county's is 30. And so this is one of those instances where the county has the more restrictive standard, and so we defer to them on that. In a lot of instances, they defer to us. We're more restrictive. But this is one instance where they are more restrictive. Do we want to meet them where they are, or do we want to keep it at 20? I think it's something for us to think about, and it's something to think about, too, with townhomes. Because this really only starts to be an issue in the county when we have a townhome development that comes in, and we're okay with them being 20 feet wide, but the county wants that to be a 30-foot wide lot. How do we handle that? So that's something to think about, where we meet them, if we meet them at all. In most instances, well, no, there's a few others like cul-de-sac length. You know, they allow multiple accesses off of an easement. There's a few more places where we're more restrictive, and I don't know that we want to come down.
Right. I just didn't know if it's only a few isolated ones, could we just identify those areas and just say, except with the exception of these areas?
Oh, that's interesting.
You know,
We could do that.
for right now. And
Yeah.
if it gets worse, then can we come back and modify it if it?
We can take a look at it.
Okay.
And then I know I've talked a little bit about this lot configuration thing already, but again, this would let the director approve alternate lot configurations where topography or other special conditions exist. City engineer and planning director get together. Appeal goes to the planning commission as a waiver. And so the last two articles would be about permitting construction and inspection of improvements. This is that section that's very large today that involves a lot of ifs and thens. It has gotten much smaller and refers to Chapter 21 and the Tuscaloosa Transportation Standards. And so that's great. And then the final plat procedure and design standards with bonding involved there. So we've really just moved that portion to the end in a logical fashion. You get it approved, you build it, you final plat it. And so, Commission, that's where I am on this tonight. I know you've had a chance to do it, and there's still massaging, there's still wrestling involved in this. But I think it's getting to a point where I can see a future, and it's pretty rosy in terms of lightening the load, hopefully.
The languages that we'll be using in our plan here, is it kind of universal language now? So everybody, Tim can go talk the same language for somebody in Birmingham or wherever?
Yeah, and that's where, like, the pre-plat meeting, we're the only ones that use pre-design that I've met. When I say something to another community about, oh, at this pre-design meeting, they're like, oh, wow, like, before, like, you're doing a construction type meeting now? And I'm like, oh, no, this is just before they even come for a preliminary plat. So that's where we just need to fix our language, but we're trying to make it more universal.
Ashley,
Yes,
is the Tuscaloosa Transportation Standards, is that going to be like a publicized document or?
Mr. Gardner. I'm going to defer to Mr. Gardner.
What was the question?
The Tuscaloosa Transportation Standards, is that going to be like something that's published, like for?
Oh, yes, yes. And our goal is to make a brief presentation at the upcoming Planning Commission meeting. The transportation standards are a book about that thick, and they'll be available online, just like all of our other documents are. And it's going to be fairly detailed. Gives you guidance, depending on what type of neighborhood developments you're doing, what street cross sections to choose or that are available. It deals with cul-de-sac links and you know, all the things that are kind of in the subdivision regulations. This is where we're trying to centralize a lot of this stuff. And then the subdivision regulations can just say, see the transportation standard.
That makes a lot of sense.
Took us long enough.
Well, and the best part,
How long have we been
too,
around as a city?
the best part is, you know, the transportation standards, reference framework, and, you know, it's all just connected.
It's all on your watch, Bill.
All this twisted web.
The current transportation development information contains stuff, water and horse carriages still.
Yeah.
That's right.
It does? Really?
It feels like it does.
It's old.
Wow.
It is old.
Okay,
That's
anything
what I
else?
got for you tonight.
Well, no one's in the audience. Anyone care to make any comments to staff or ask questions of staff? No, ma'am. Thank you very much. Well, we will see everybody, we'll adjourn this meeting and see everybody online, right?
Yes, our next meeting is January 4th. It's still a Wednesday. We're holding to that Wednesday schedule. But this is going to be virtual only, and we're going to start to put the puzzle piece back together, do a quick refresh, not so much for y'all necessarily, but probably for the members of the public who are playing catch-up and coming back and involving themselves in this process. But, you know, our land use character types, what that difference is between our character types and zoning, because now we can start to see how our zoning districts that we've talked about can apply in those future land use character types. So this is kind of that prep work before we start looking at the zoning map changes. Figured it'd be something pretty easy right after the holidays.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.